Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
He left everything to follow him. He declared him to be the Messiah, the Son of the living God. He denied him. And now, Peter is about to be recommissioned by Jesus. Don't you love his story? Hi, I'm Erica. Welcome to the Bible for Busy People. Before we tell the story of the day Peter is recommissioned, I want to go back to John chapter 20. This is something you and I looked at last week as we studied the empty tomb together. Do you remember this part? John chapter 20, verse 3. Peter and the other disciple, that was John, started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Verse 6, I love this. Then Simon Peter arrived and went inside. Okay, that is beautiful to me. Simon Peter was so curious. His faith was a spark in his heart this day. He was like, is it possible? You can imagine, right, what was going through his mind. Did he rise again? John stood outside the tomb. There was nothing wrong with that. But Peter went inside. He had to see. And can you imagine how that little spark of hope in his heart turned into a flame? Okay, we're going to pick up Peter's story today in John chapter 21, beginning in verse 1. Oh, it's getting good. Later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there: Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and two other disciples. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." "We'll come too," they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some." So they did. And they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved, that was John, said to Peter, "It's the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to the shore. I want to pause here for 1 second, because I want you to know that Peter had hope in his heart. He knew that even though he had strayed far from Jesus, that he denied that he even knew him because he was afraid to die, Peter knew he was loved. And you and I can have that same knowing today. You can know, as my friend Bill says, in your knower, that you are loved no matter what, that you can be forgiven. There's nothing that you have done that's greater than what Jesus did on the cross for you. Okay, we're going to pick it up in verse 8 now. The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from shore. Peter couldn't wait. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them. Fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. Okay, come on. Jesus is making breakfast for his brothers. Isn't it awesome? "Bring some of the fish you've just caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. "Now come and have some breakfast," Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. Oh, don't you love it? This was the third time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. All right, verse 15 now. Here comes Peter's recommission. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord." Peter said, "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time, he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." You know, I am tearing up here because maybe you've heard this before, but it never gets old to me. Remember that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And now Peter is being asked the question, "Do you love me?" And he's given an opportunity to say 3 times, "Lord, you know I love you." And this is what Jesus does. He redeems our mistakes. His love is greater than anything you and I could have ever done. Isn't that absolutely wonderful? And you know, as I'm reading this, something occurs to me. You know, how many times have you felt hurt by something Jesus allowed in your life? But there's always a purpose behind it. Peter's not getting it at first. He doesn't get that Jesus is giving him an opportunity to redeem those denials, and it's wonderful. All right, I hope you're as encouraged as I am. As we've been doing all week, I want to conclude today's episode with some words from Peter as he's becoming the rock that Jesus told him he would build his church on. We're going to go back to Peter's first letter to the church, 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. You love him even though you have never seen him. Though you do not see him now, you trust him, and you rejoice with a glorious, inexpressible joy. The reward for trusting him will be the salvation of your souls. Oh, how I hope that this series on Peter has filled you with a glorious and inexpressible joy. You're loved no matter what. All right, next time you and I will celebrate joy bombs in the Psalms. Until then, yes, you're really loved. Thank you so much for listening to the Bible for Busy People. If you need prayer or you're ready to go a little deeper in your faith, we've posted some resources for you in our show notes. We'd love for you to share this podcast with a friend and leave us a review. It helps us reach even more people with the hope of Jesus. This podcast is part of Purposely, a podcast network designed with practical podcasts to help you find and live in God's purpose for your life. Find more podcasts that will recharge you at onpurposely.com.